Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here, although I wasn't sure that the AV equipment was going to survive Frank with the T-shirt gun. One of the very first OpenStack trips that I took actually was coming up here to New York back in, I think it was around October or November of 2010, and went to a financial services company here and sat with one of the Nova developers and in their offices and helped them set up a really early and extremely rudimentary OpenStack POC. And so I was thinking about that this morning. It's cool to be back here at our first real OpenStack Day event and see how much the community has grown, here locally, but also all over. And that's something that I always like to talk about at these events because we do a lot of them. And how many of you are actually from the northeast region of the U.S. here? Okay, so the majority. I've also seen a lot of familiar faces from other parts of the OpenStack community. But it's always interesting to me to be able to travel around to these different OpenStack Day events. We do about 30 this year, all over the world, and it's incredible to run into people who are contributing to the software, using it, evaluating it, and the view that I get to have is to see how all of us are kind of part of this global community. So we're here today in New York. A couple of weeks ago, we were out in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. A couple weeks before that, we were in Beijing. This was an attempt at the largest OpenStack selfie to date. There were about 3,000 people there. And before that, we were in other cities in Asia, all across Europe and the Middle East. And it's just something that is really cool to be a part of because we are tackling, I think, very important technology problems, but doing it in a way that is unique and that gives us all a lot of opportunities to influence it and have an impact in ways that we haven't before. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the things that I think is also really cool to see between back when we started OpenStack and where we are now is how diverse the use cases are. When I came up here to New York City almost 6 years ago, that prototype and that proof of concept that we were putting together was for a pretty basic private cloud focused on some internal web workloads that this company wanted to kind of kick the tires on running a cloud internally. And as the years have gone by, we've added so many different use cases and users that we never thought of at that time as why we were building the software. And these are just some of the user logos that are out there running OpenStack in production. And you'll see enterprise private clouds, you'll see public clouds, a lot of telecom and NFV clouds that are being built, research, academic, government usage, and all over the world. And that, I think, is something that is really important for us to keep in mind as we look forward. And as we think about where is OpenStack going to go and what does it need to be. Every time that we do these events, we're getting the community together, and it's an opportunity to have these discussions and to influence it. But this week especially. This week started out with a working group meeting on Monday. We have the 2 days of the event here. And then coming out of this, we're actually going into a meetup of OpenStack operators who are getting together to share best practices, to talk about what's working, what's not working, how they're handling the real-world, day-to-day operations of OpenStack environments. And so we have operators from all over the world. We have developers, PTLs, TC members, all here. And it's an important week for OpenStack as we start to look towards the future and kind of plan where we go. This was a stat that some people talked about yesterday. In our most recent user survey, 65% of deployments were cataloged as being in production, and that's a 33% increase just over last year. And if you go back farther, we started out at a very low percentage. So this is something that across these use cases, we're seeing these OpenStack clouds start to handle more and more real workloads. But what is it that draws people to OpenStack? This is another question that we ask. And 97% of users picked as one of the top few reasons for why they were using OpenStack to have a standard set of APIs that controlled compute, storage, and networking. And at the foundation, we have a program called OpenStack Powered, which is focused around interoperability. And any product or service that's in the market that calls itself OpenStack, in order to be able to do that, they have to pass this set of testing requirements. And it is API compatibility as well as underlying requirements for the software technology that the OpenStack cloud is using. So when you see the different companies here that have OpenStack products and services and their distributions from Canonical and Red Hat and others, they're all having to go through this test, and that's because it's something that is one of the real value propositions for OpenStack. Yesterday afternoon we had a board meeting, and the OpenStack Foundation Board of Directors actually approved the latest iteration of the OpenStack powered interop testing and expanded it to include even more functionality and additional new tests. So this is something that we launched last year, but it continues to grow and iterate just like the rest of OpenStack does. And that's kind of what I want to talk about for the rest of the time that I have. If we think about where we are going with this whole OpenStack ride that we're on, and where we started, I think that there's really a massive opportunity and a massive shift that's happening across all of our companies all around the world. And it's not a secret. It's the shift to everything being software defined and computing driving everything that we do. And as we look out as far as we can imagine, every advancement that we make, every new invention is going to rely on computing and the ability to run software to a greater and greater extent. And that's why these projects and these capabilities and these public clouds are growing so rapidly right now and are being used in so many different cases. One of the things, though, that I think is very special and unique about OpenStack is the approach that we have to solving for these problems and to giving people these capabilities. In the technology world, so often, as these kinds of opportunities come up, the markets are shaped by these attitudes about land grabs. And you want to be first into the market, you want to grab as much of the market as you can, and people view it as a zero-sum game. And so, if I don't have 90% market share of cloud, then I'm not going to matter in a few years. If I don't have 90% market share of database server, whatever it is, that's a lot of times how people think about it. But I think that one of the things that I've really started to believe is that as you look across human progress in general, many things that we do that really propel us forward and allow us to create new breakthroughs in whatever it is, science, finance, they're actually positive sum games. And the more computing capacity, the more widely available it is, the more problems we solve, the more opportunities we create, and the more we can do as humanity overall. And that is something that an open source project is uniquely positioned to do really well, to create an environment where it's not about versus, it's about and. And that's something that I think we see in many of the OpenStack deployments that we get to. So if we're thinking about a positive sum cloud future where the amount of computing capacity is going to continue to grow, and the more that we enable that, the more that we can all accomplish, the more research we can do, the more money we can make, the more problems we can solve, the more inventions we can create. How does OpenStack need to address that, and what do we need to think about? Especially, I think it's a good thing to talk about this week when we have so many community leaders here and this whole series of events. So there are three things that I think it's really important for us to keep in mind as we look forward and think about how we can really make this positive sum cloud future reality. The first one is we have to continue to innovate. OpenStack, when it started, was coming into a pretty early market in cloud overall. And it was something that there was not a lot of prior art. There were a handful of existing open source projects. They were all very early. And so it was something where we had to go create a lot of technology, not just around managing compute, storage, and networking, but also around the way that we did our open source development process. OpenStack has grown to be one of the largest open source projects in history. And the volume of code that comes through and the volume of contributors who participate is really on a scale that's hard to fathom sometimes. And it works really well. And consistently, we've hit our releases every 6 months for 6 years now, or I guess 5 years. The first couple were on a 3-month cycle. And that's something that required us to think differently about how open source and open source contribution and testing were handled. The way that our community has structured itself and organically created things like the operators meetup that's happening later this week, different working groups, the technical governance that we have. These are all things that have been really innovative. And I think we're at a point where we're starting to get to the next wave of innovation that's going to enable a lot of really cool use cases on the cloud. And so, I think that it's very dangerous if we lose momentum and we lose that kind of spark and hunger to go out and continue to innovate. And some of the things that, specifically that I'm talking about are things like IoT, the Internet of Things. 50 billion devices are supposed to come online in the next 5 years that are connected to the internet. And what are all of those devices doing? They are generating data, passing data around, communicating, but most of them have a pretty small amount of processing power. And they're going to rely on clouds to do the bulk of the work. This is a demo that we did at our most recent OpenStack Summit in Austin. And it was a pretty cool demo from some people in the Czech Republic who are building a smart city using Raspberry Pis, sensors, Kubernetes, OpenStack. And they're doing this to measure air quality, traffic, different environmental factors in the city. And they're really creating something that's innovative with a bunch of open technologies. And that's just one example, and there are hundreds and thousands of those that are coming out. If you go to kind of the more industrial side, you look at the telco world. And I know Verizon is speaking later today about some of the things that they're doing in their cloud. But the telco industry overall is going through a really massive shift right now. And so this is a use case that we didn't envision for OpenStack 6 years ago, but is something that requires programmable compute, storage, and networking, and is really shaking up one of the largest industries on the planet. And OpenStack is at the center of it. And so continuing to think about how we support these new workloads and also the next ones that are going to come along over the coming decades is something that I think is really important for us to keep in mind. So, when I have talked about this before, people say, so you just want OpenStack to do everything. You want OpenStack to be all things to everybody. And that's not actually my view at all. The second point is to collaborate. And this is, again, something that OpenStack has a history of doing, whether it's working with hypervisors like Zen, KVM, ESX, Hyper-V. We didn't go out and try to build our own full virtualization engine. We worked with existing technologies. And as we look to the next wave of things that are happening, one of the biggest technologies is obviously around containers. And containers are an awesome tool for managing applications, packaging them, and deploying them in a way that gives you new options to control how the services run, how they are self-healing, how they work together. But ultimately, those containerized applications still need compute, storage, and networking. So this is a big opportunity to work with the leading technologists in the container world who are building things like Kubernetes and Mesos and other technologies to put this together in a way that creates a full package. And again, in Austin, we heard from LivePerson, who is, they run the chat support and service and sales applications on a lot of websites. They have data centers all over the world. They've been using OpenStack for, I think, about 4 years now. And last year, their development teams wanted to start using a containerized deployment methodology for some parts of their software and start using microservices. So they rolled out Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. We're able to take advantage of their existing networking environment that OpenStack managed, the storage environment that OpenStack managed, and really get a big acceleration on the time that it took them to go from idea to microservices in production on Kubernetes for their developers. That is a great example of collaboration where the user wins. And there's also a talk later today that I think John Griffith is giving on connecting OpenStack block storage devices into containers. So we have a service called Sender that manages block storage, and it's not just for connecting block storage into virtual machines in Nova. It can be used for a variety of things. And I know there are companies who are connecting Neutron to containers, who are connecting Keystone to container environments. So there's a lot of stuff that the OpenStack community has done that's useful in other contexts, and there are other communities who are doing things that really add to the capabilities of OpenStack. SAP is building an industrial IoT or Industry 4.0 system with Siemens that runs on OpenStack plus Cloud Foundry plus a commercial product from Siemens called MindSphere. And again, you put all of these together and you have something really powerful. And this gets back again to collaboration and a positive sum game. When we do this and we think about how we can make these connections instead of how we have to compete, then users win. And ultimately, that is the biggest benefit that an open source community can bring to its constituents, is the fact that users participate, they're part of the community, developers can work directly with users, we can all solve problems together in a way where we all win instead of there being this kind of competitive nature among people. And the third one, which I think gets to some of the discussions that we've heard from users yesterday and that I'm sure we'll hear today, is that we have to think about how we make it easier to replicate success. Walmart spoke yesterday, and they talked about OneOps, which is a tool that they've used to enable more rapid development and iteration in their development teams on top of OpenStack. Comcast spoke. They talked about some of the challenges that they've run into as they have scaled OpenStack and added new services, and some of the ways that they would like to collaborate to solve those. And I think that this is a really key thing that we need to work more and more on in the community is thinking about how do we make that success easier to replicate. Things like the ops meetups are part of it, but there's also, I think, missing content that we've started to try to fill in. And we have a book that we actually just recently published that combines some strategy content around OpenStack, as well as some specific cloud planning kinds of questions and things that are good to keep in mind if you are looking at going down the cloud path. And this is not just about the technology, because as we've worked with companies all over, one of the things that we keep hearing is that the technology is not necessarily the hardest part. There are a lot of cultural issues and organizational issues. How do you find the right talent? How do you structure a team? How do you encourage people to use the cloud in the right way internally? So these books address some of that, and we actually have some of these here in the building. So if you're interested in this, you can come find us, and we can get you a copy. Otherwise, you can go to openstack.org/enterprise and download an electronic version. And there's a lot of other material there along those lines. And the other part, which I mentioned, that is really important too, is we have to keep building the talent pool. That's a key aspect of allowing people to be able to replicate the success. We just launched our first professional certification earlier this year. It's called the Certified OpenStack Administrator. And we launched this in April. And we've had hundreds of people go through this process and are continuing to promote this. And it's an online test. It's skills-based. So we have people who are taking it in a lot of different countries. But I think that this is a really key initiative that we launched because over and over again, people want to know, how do I find talent that can help me run my OpenStack environment and run my OpenStack cloud? So this is one of the programs that we've done at the foundation that I think is most important. And if you are interested in making OpenStack and operating OpenStack clouds part of your career, I'd encourage you to go out and look into this. And I'd love your feedback on it too if you go through the process. But in summary, I think that we are at this incredible point in technology, one of the biggest technology opportunities that we've ever faced in terms of just this exploding need for computing power, for data processing. And we in OpenStack are positioned really well to be able to help people solve the real-world problems that come along with that. But we have to make sure that we don't get entrenched in only what we've done to date, that we don't get caught up in a not invented here attitude, that we're willing to collaborate with other communities to embrace new tools and technologies, and that we also always keep in mind how do we help the people who are next in line be able to do the things that we've done successfully and share that information. So this week is a really important week for OpenStack, not just here at this event, but across all of the events that are happening. And so I hope that we can take these and go out and really put them to use and go after this opportunity in a big way. Thank you.